Welcome to today's webinar, The Sandwich Generation, Simultaneously Caring for Children and Aging Parents. My name is Emily Scahill. I'm the Manager of Public Education at Mental Health America's National Office, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. A few things to go over before I introduce our presenters. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out to all registrants within 1 week, along with the slides. We do not offer CEUs, but if you would like a certificate of attendance, we have a form for you to request one. I'll post the link to that form in the chat shortly, and it will be included in that follow-up email as well. And last but not least, we've built in some time for a Q&A. Please post your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation, and we'll go through some at the end. And feel free, of course, to make comments or share some of your knowledge in there as well. And now I'm so excited to welcome today's presenters, Christina Irving and Cathy Hennis. Christina Irving is the Client Services Director at Family Caregiver Alliance. She oversees the staff of the Bay Area Caregiver Resource Center, who provide direct services to family caregivers, including assessment, counseling, education, and support. She has been with FCA for over 15 years, starting as a family consultant and then as clinical supervisor. She received a master's degree in social work from San Jose State University and is a licensed clinical social worker. Cathy Hennis is a 39-year-old parent and caregiver. She lives in Vermont with her partner and 3-year-old daughter, while also taking care of her 75-year-old mother. Cathy has been struggling with being in the sandwich generation for years, balancing both of these roles while also trying to care for herself. Cathy is happy to share her story and experience and hopes to amplify the voices of caregivers struggling in similar ways. They both have tons of great information to share with us today, so I'll turn it over to Christina to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you today and to share a little bit about our experience with caregivers and hopefully provide some information and resources that will be helpful as you're in your own journey of caregiving. So as we get started, we're going to talk about what does it mean to be a sandwich generation caregiver? What does that look like? How do we cope with it? How do we manage that struggle of caring for ourselves as well as caring for other people? So as we're starting, what does it really mean to be a caregiver? It's not something that everyone identifies with. Sometimes it feels like this is just what we do for family. The changes might come on really gradually. Often we see that when there's chronic health issues, changing issues related to aging or potentially dementia. And sometimes it happens really suddenly. If you're caring for somebody who had a stroke or an accident or an injury, overnight, your world may change and you are suddenly a caregiver. And again, even if we don't identify that way, it is a different role. You're still the parent to your kids, you're still the kid to your parents, and yet you are taking on other tasks that are not part of those relationships. And so it is a different experience, even if we don't always recognize it as such early on. Household chores, that may have been part of your responsibility previously, but now you're doing it for another person as well. Maybe you're helping your parent with the bills and with their own laundry. You might be stepping into a role where you are helping them with their personal care. And that can have varying degrees of discomfort sometimes. And you might even be providing medical tasks. And more caregivers are doing this, managing medications, but maybe also helping to check blood pressure or check blood sugar levels for someone who's diabetic and providing insulin. And so all these roles and tasks that oftentimes caregivers aren't trained to do, you just are suddenly doing them. And yet you are also still a parent and a child, maybe a spouse or a partner or a sibling. So we have all these different kind of roles, and we see sometimes those conflict between those roles when you step into this caregiving world. And it's because of all these changes and these shifts that we often see some of this conflict, or at least just major impacts on the family dynamics as a whole. This role reversal, sometimes when you are a caregiver for a parent, it may start to feel like you are parenting your parent. And that might create some tension because they may also feel like, no, I'm the parent. You don't tell me what to do. They may be faced with losing some of their own independence. And that can create some challenges. It's not easy to shift those roles of what does our relationship look like now when I'm needing to provide more care and support for you. And then there's so many different responsibilities and kind of competing demands for your time, and your parent, your kids, you might be your job, the other relationships in your life. And how do you prioritize where your time goes? I think that's one of the biggest things we hear from caregivers is this sense of there's not enough of me. I need to clone myself to be able to do all these things and feel like I am um, meeting the needs of the people in my life in a way that I want to. And we also hear a lot from caregivers of the worry about the impact on their kids of caregiving. And sometimes the worry is I don't have enough time for them in the same way that I used to. I'm not as available as I was before. And it also might be a worry of I don't want them to step in and be doing a lot of care. I don't want to take away their childhood or burden them. And these are real worries. This sense of there's not going to be one right way to do this. And this concern about how much do we involve kids and what's the impact on the kids of caregiving. There's not a lot of research on it right now. I think we're seeing a little bit more come as there's more awareness of how much kids really do when it comes to caregiving. There are, some studies that show that there can be a negative impact on schooling and academic life, that kids might experience more more anxiety when they're caregiving. But we tend to see that for kids that are taking on a really substantial role in caregiving. And that's most commonly when it's their parent who needs care, because they may then be stepping into the role of caring for their parent in addition to losing a little bit of their own caregiver. So not to say that that experience can't happen as well for those where it's a grandparent or another relative needing care, but it's most commonly when it's their parent needing care. So there are some studies that show kind of the flip side. So again, the worry and the burden, but the flip side to it is some of the potential benefits for caregiving children. And that there is research that shows that family caregiving and really in general, helping with kind of family responsibilities can actually help with a sense of maturity in children, with self-reliance and with developing empathy. They've found that it can contribute to their own self-esteem and feelings of competence and confidence. So it's a balance, and it's a hard balance. And I think it's something that family caregivers really worry about. But I do just want us to keep in mind that kind of benefit versus burden conversation, because it's not all just negative, even though that's often where we focus, because we are, rightfully so concerned about the development of our kids in these scenarios. But how do we focus on where there is potential positive? But these are the worries and the challenges that just add to that stress and anxiety that family caregivers experience, because there just doesn't feel like there's ever enough of us or enough time. And because of all that, what we hear so commonly from caregivers is this feeling of guilt. This feeling that I should be able to do it all. I should be able to take care of my parents and take care of my kids, be there for my spouse or my partner, for my friends. I shouldn't get frustrated. I should be able to stay patient and get everything done during the day. And it's a really common feeling. And it's one of those things that we're not necessarily going to eliminate. We're not going to get rid of these feelings of guilt. They're not just going to be gone. But that doesn't mean we can't lessen it. And part of how we do that is trying to think about, is this something that I really need to feel guilty about? And what's helpful is to be able to differentiate sometimes between guilt versus regret. Guilt says I've done something wrong, I've done something to hurt or harm or offend another person, and it can be a healthy emotion in those situations because it says I need to apologize or make amends in some way. Regret can be defined as the sorrow we feel about circumstances outside of our control. So there is one of you, and there are multiple demands that you're experiencing. And there's only so many hours in the day. So when we feel like we can't meet all of the demands in the way that we want to, some of what we're feeling is regret. That these are things outside of my control and I'm doing the best I can with it, but it may not be perfect. We may not be able to do it all. Does that mean that we're just not going to feel guilt anymore? No, probably not. That's not ever going to go away. But that we sometimes think about, is this something that I have control over? Is this something that I am doing to hurt or harm or offend somebody else? Or is it that I'm doing the best I can in a very imperfect system? And that I'm caring for somebody maybe who has a chronic or progressive condition that isn't going to get better, which means I'm not going to be able to fix it. And so we're managing it in the best way that we can. And we're going to touch back on this again in a minute, but again, just to sometimes think about, is this something I need to feel guilty over because I'm doing something wrong? Or is it I'm doing the best I can with sometimes fairly crappy circumstances and not great options? The other piece of sometimes these really challenging emotions and the difficulty we experience is all the losses that come with caregiving. And so I want to think about this in terms of something we call ambiguous loss, this idea that we have lost something and yet it's not fully gone. So you're caring for somebody who is still here, they're still with you, and yet they may not be the same person that they were before, either because of their illness or diagnosis, or there's cognitive changes or personality changes, and they're not who they were before, but they're still here. You may also say, I don't feel I'm the same person anymore. My life has changed. My roles and maybe part of my identity has changed, but yet I'm still here. So it's shifting our thinking from an either or, that either we have something or we've lost it, to this both and, that we can say, I both have lost some of my relationship with my parent. It's not how it was before. And yet there's still things I really enjoy doing with them. That I'm sad about not being able to spend as much time with my kids in the same way I used to. And yet I do still have time with them and I do still enjoy that time. And it's a way that we can grieve for what we've lost, because our life does look very different than it did before. But it's how do we still hold on to what we still have? How do we grieve for what we don't have, what we've lost? And how do we acknowledge what the positives are? What are the benefits? And there's not always great rituals around grief when it's caregiving, because again, no one's died, they're still here. And yet we have these losses. And that's where connecting with other caregivers can be so helpful, because they get it. They understand when you're talking about grieving for somebody who might be sitting in the other room. And so that can be really, really helpful for people, because there is so much loss that can come with caregiving, because our lives just are so very, very different. So when we think about how do we cope with this? We've got all these competing demands. We feel guilty, we feel loss, and we feel grief. How do we take care of our own mental and emotional health? The perspective I want to talk about today is this idea of resilience, that building up our own resilience is how we take care of ourselves, how we support our own health. That's our physical health, that's our emotional and our mental health while we're still caregiving. And there's lots of different definitions of resilience, but the one that we're going to use today is that resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And if that doesn't really encompass caregiving, I don't really know what else does. Two pieces that I want to highlight with this is that it is a process. This is not something that we just successfully do overnight. It's kind of something ongoing that we need to be working on. And it's, again, how we are adapting well. So this doesn't mean that things don't bother us anymore, that we are not still stressed out and frustrated at times, but it's that we have more of a capacity to cope with them. So if we think of like a rubber band, that it still stretches, you know, it's not staying exactly as it is. It's still stretching, it's still being stressed, but it recovers faster. So we don't have quite that same negative impact on our well-being the more resilient we are. So there are some different ways that we can build up resilience, and we're going to touch on each of these today. So embracing healthy thoughts, finding purpose, building connections, seeking help, and finding things that foster wellness. So let's start with thinking about embracing healthy thoughts. Guilt plays into this a lot because, again, it's how we talk to ourselves. So when we talk about embracing healthy thoughts, we're talking about changing unhelpful self-talk. And self-talk is that narrative, that commentary inside of our brain about what we're doing, what we're getting done, what we're not getting done. It's all the things that we tell ourselves. And we don't always pay attention to it, but it has an impact on us. It impacts our mood. It impacts how we kind of interact with people and the world. And so we have to start usually just by noticing it and figuring out, how do we change our self-talk into ways that's more helpful and more positive. And positive self-talk does not mean that we don't acknowledge that things are hard. You know, some people think when they hear, oh, you know, you need to be more positive, don't talk down to yourself so much. And they think, well, this is really difficult, and I don't feel like I'm always doing it right. It doesn't mean that we can't have those feelings and those thoughts, but it's having them in a realistic way and not only focusing on the negative. So I think one that I hear from caregivers a lot is this idea of, I got nothing done today. I couldn't get anything done. It didn't go as planned. Nothing. I didn't accomplish anything. And I would say, really? You as a caregiver did nothing today? And so thinking about, is that really true? And it might be you didn't get to anything on your to-do list, but does it really mean you got nothing done? I was in a hotel one time and they had, you know, those little notepads that are by the phone, and it's one that said accomplished list. Feels much better than a to-do list, doesn't it? And I've taken that sometimes with caregivers to say, what did you get done today? Chances are, you know, you got up, you got dressed, you've gotten your kids up, your parents up, everybody had breakfast, maybe you helped a parent get medication, did you go to work? You may have done all these things. Maybe there was an unexpected doctor's visit or a health scare, and you had to take care of that and had to drop other things on your to-do list, but it means that you actually got a lot done. So when we're changing our self-talk, if we say, I got nothing done today, we want to rephrase that sometimes to say, well, no, I didn't get to the things I wanted to, but look how much I did accomplish. Look how much I got done. Everyone is safe and healthy and cared for. And maybe we had some bumps in the road and some struggles, and it wasn't what I wanted the day to look like, but I still managed to do all of these things. So noticing when we're overgeneralizing, I got nothing done, I can't do anything right, this is never going to get better. Just challenging those thoughts for ourselves. Is that always true, or are there exceptions to that? And we don't ignore or discount the things that are hard or negative, but how do we also pay attention to what's going well, what we're doing well, what we feel happy or successful about? This can be really hard to do on our own. So talking to a therapist or a counselor can be really helpful. But at the end of the day, it's focusing on, what can I control? What can I actually do? And what are things that I have to let go of or grieve the loss of because they're no longer possible? So thinking about, again, how do we think about things? Because that's going to impact how we respond to them, how we cope, how we adapt. And similar to that is finding purpose. Yeah, with all the challenges and frustrations and sadness that comes with caregiving, for many people, it can give them a sense of purpose, or they find meaning in their life. So I would ask, if you're comfortable, share in the chat, what is the positive of caregiving? What's something that has given you purpose or meaning as a caregiver? Some people will say that they've learned skills that they didn't ever expect to have. They may never wanted to have, but they've learned them anyway. The relationship to the person they're caring for, getting to have that time with them. Or just that sense of, I'm taking care of my family. I'm doing something that supports them and cares for them. And that can bring something positive into their life. And while these things, acknowledging the purpose, the positive, the meaning that caregiving brings, again, they don't take away from the things that are negative, but they can be a protective factor, meaning that those things that are hard and stressful don't always impact us as strongly when we can remember that there might be some good that's coming out of it also. So again, as part of resilience, we're not saying that these things aren't still going to be difficult, but they may not knock us down as far when we can remember and recognize the positive aspects that are coming out of it. Again, sometimes this is hard to do on our own, and where we can help ourselves do that is when we create community with other caregivers and build those connections. Caregivers often experience isolation and loneliness, and sometimes that's hard for others to understand, because they say, well, you have someone with you maybe all the time because you're caring for them. And especially for sandwich generation caregivers, you may have many people with you all the time, but it's people who are relying on you, asking you to do things, needing things from you. And so how do we have these connections in our life with people who are giving support back to us, who we can share kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of caregiving with, and people who understand it? And that might be some of your family and friends. And so finding ways to maintain those connections with them, even if you don't have a lot of time to get out and see them. If you can connect with other caregivers, that can be a great source of support. Again, time I know is hard, but there are a number of online support groups, and we've seen this really grow and develop over the course of the last 2 years. There are Facebook groups for caregivers. There's support groups for organizations. We've seen some faith communities create support groups. So finding those opportunities to connect with other caregivers, and reach out to your local community or senior center for classes around caregiving, because there are often many of those, and some in person, some virtual, but a way to really hear from other caregivers, their experiences, share your own, and be with people who are walking a similar journey. Even if it's different from yours in some ways, you generally will find some commonality. And I think we'll probably see that when we hear from Cathy in a couple minutes. Even when our journeys are a little different, there's a lot of same experiences and shared emotions. So one of the other pieces of building up our resilience is really seeking out help. Asking for help when you need it is a sign of strength. Sometimes we don't recognize that. We feel like, nope, I should be able to do this myself. This is my family. I should be able to take care of them. I should be able to do it all. And we can't. None of us can do it all by ourselves all the time. So asking for help, accepting help when it is offered to you. And you might be asking your help for your parent or for your kids, but also for yourself. What do you need? And it might mean you need somebody to pick up your kids from school some days, or to help with a doctor's appointment, maybe to pick up groceries or drop by a meal, or you need somebody who you can just talk to and letting them know, I don't need suggestions. I just need to be able to vent for a little bit and just be heard. And that's all I need right now. So being able to ask for and accept help. If you do have multiple people in your life who can step up in different ways, you might look for ways to kind of coordinate that care. So there are a number of tools, websites and apps that help you create shared calendars where people can sign up for different tasks. So you're not always having to ask everybody specifically, but they can pick and choose what are the tasks or activities that they can help with, maybe even just when to visit. If you're still working, talk with your HR person. If you have an employee assistance program, definitely connect to them, because there are often resources through employee assistance program for counseling, for kind of elder care navigation, sometimes for child care services. Find out if you are eligible for family and medical leave, or if paid family leave exists where you live. Things that can allow you to take time off from work to manage doctor's appointments. When somebody's hospitalized, when you need to coordinate in-home care. Counseling can be really helpful for you, for anyone else in the family, for your kids. Definitely talk with their school. Are there services or resources that they have there? Do they have a counselor? Can their teachers notice and pay attention to things if they're coming up? Are there youth programs for the community that are going to provide either formal counseling or sometimes just more of an informal emotional support? Through your insurance, you might be able to get it. And many areas will have community health programs where you might find different sliding scale counseling programs available for anyone in the family. And then again, through your employee assistance program. And then community resources. Depending on where you live, this can vary dramatically. What's available. If you were caring for someone over 60 or with dementia, there is the National Family Caregiver Support Program. It exists in every state, in every county. There are services. Again, what those services look like is going to vary, but those might be an option. Through Family Caregiver Alliance's state-by-state resource guide, you can find some of your local services, or where do you start from, or reaching out to the elder care locator. And again, they can also direct you towards your local resources. But I'd say start early with those. Even if you think you're doing okay and you may not need much help yet, reach out soon, just so that you know what's available and you don't have to look for them in a crisis. And then the last piece that we're going to touch on about resilience is finding things that really foster wellness. And this varies person to person. So share in the chat if you like, what works for you? What helps you relieve your stress? What helps you feel better? Helps foster your own wellness? For some people, it's exercise, it's pets, it's music, it's reading. It might be your spiritual practices or your faith. Journaling or meditation, counseling. And I know the biggest challenge for caregivers is there's not enough time. I could never do these things. It's figuring out what's realistic for you. How do you fit this into your life in a way that it can become a regular practice? And for many, that means, what can I do in 5-minute increments when I have a second? What can I do in these little bits of time that are going to make an impact on me? And that might mean being able to journal for a couple minutes, just going out for a walk, being able to sit outside and just look at the trees or the flowers, finding ways to use humor. You know, might be when you're making dinner, ask your kids, I want you to go look up some jokes and come and tell them to me. Or, you know, show a funny YouTube video that we can sit and watch together while I'm doing something else. But that lets you have that connection with them, but also lets you have a moment of laughter. And when all else fails and you're just feeling super stressed and overwhelmed and not able to fit this in anywhere, just breathing. Taking a moment to just take some deep breaths. When we're stressed, when we're anxious, we tend to breathe really shallowly up here. And we don't really slow down. So when all you have is 30 seconds and it's been a stressful day and you are tired and you've got everybody needing something from you, to just take that moment and say, I'm just going to breathe. I'm going to let my heart rate slow, my blood pressure go down a little bit. Find something that kind of calms your mind and just centers you. And just take those moments to just let it go just for a second. And the more regularly we do these things, the more it helps us cope. It doesn't eliminate the stresses, doesn't make it all go away, but it strengthens us and our capacity to deal with it. What I want to leave you with before I turn this over to Cathy is, this worry and this anxiety that so many caregivers have of, I can't do it all, I can't do it right, I'm not able to do it perfectly, is something we have to find ways to let go of. So there's a wonderful poet, former caregiver and author, Francis Kakugawa, who has a poem, and I won't read the whole thing, but I do encourage you to look it up if you're interested. But from one of her poems, she says, "We are caregivers, perfect in our imperfections." And so realizing how much value as a caregiver you bring to your relationships, to the world. We're not going to be perfect, but it doesn't mean that there is not still perfection in what you do. And so I hope, just again, recognizing as hard as some things are, and that positivity and that meaning and purpose that you have as a caregiver. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cathy to share a little bit more.
Hi, so I'm Cathy, and like Emily mentioned earlier, I'm 39 years old and I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I take care of my 75-year-old mom. I've been doing this for a few years now, and I'm going to talk today about how I became a caregiver, how I became a mom, and what it's like to do both at once, how the pandemic has influenced that, and what are some things that have worked for me and what are some things that have not worked for me in terms of both self-care and also community care and receiving care from others, both systemically and also from friends and family. I'm sharing some pictures today of my family. I adore everyone in these pictures. My partner and I and our daughter, whose name is Juno, and my mom and myself, and my mom and my daughter. And the last picture on the bottom right is my mom enjoying a brief minute of sunshine. She doesn't usually feel well enough to get outside, and we really only go out for doctor's appointments for the most part. But there was this rare moment she felt well, and it was a sunny day, and so she's out there basking in the sunlight, and I feel really grateful for that moment. So how I became a caregiver, my parents both have dealt with a lot of chronic health issues, and in 2017 we decided that they would move to Vermont so I could help take care of them a little more. My mom suffers with severe rheumatoid and osteoarthritis, in addition to living with a lot of chronic pain from those conditions and other health conditions that she's acquired over the years as well. And when they first moved here, it was a lot, but they were doing okay. I was able to maintain full-time work as a social worker, and things were okay. I had a semblance of a social life. I was holding it together. And then another reason my parents moved up is because I was planning on having a baby, and they wanted to be close to my child. And I also wanted my child to be close to grandparents. And I get pregnant shortly after they moved here. My child was born in 2018, and I had a pretty traumatic birth and labor. I had an emergency C-section with some extra complications, so my recovery was quite slow and difficult. And anyone that's a new parent obviously knows it is extremely exhausting and tiring. And I developed severe postpartum depression and anxiety, partially, I'm sure, from the experience of hormonal changes, but also sort of immediately after having my baby, my parents just fell apart completely. Even within the 5 days that I was in the hospital recovering from my C-section, my parents declined rapidly. I think I wasn't clear how much support I had been providing to them until I wasn't available anymore. So we were just sort of dealing with things. We don't have any family in town that could help. And we were just trying to sort of figure out how to be new parents and be bonded with our child. And I was feeling a lot of stress given the circumstances. And then about a month and a half into new parenthood for me, my dad got diagnosed with a terminal illness. He was given 3 to 5 years to live, but he only unfortunately made it 1 month. So it was a huge shock to my system and to our family. One of the first the first car ride I took after giving birth was just to see my dad and give him a hug after finding out this news. It wasn't to take my kid on a picnic or, go celebrate with some friends that I have a new baby and bring her with me. It was literally just this. And so my dad, when he was dying, when my child was 3 months old, he was in the ICU and a lot of family flew in to be around. And just to tell you this story as an example of what being in this dual relationship is like. My dad, we were giving him hugs and talking. He was totally like conscious and able to speak with us while he was dying. And we had a babysitter. My friend was watching my 3-month-old for the first time. And as any new parent knows, it's always nerve-wracking when you have that like first babysitter experience. And I couldn't even focus on that. I just had to be with my dad. And he told me as he was dying that if it was going to take a while for him to die, that I should go home and be with my baby, because he knew that I was worried about that. And of course I said, no, Dad, like, I'm going to stay with you here. I'm going to be with you when you pass. And they told us it would probably be a couple hours. Well, a couple hours came and went, and he was still alive in and out of consciousness at that point. And I had to make the decision to go home. I was breastfeeding my child. She needed to eat. And I had to say goodbye to my dad. And I had to make the difficult decision whether to like stay with my dad while he was dying or feed my child. So I went home and I said goodbye, and he died 10 minutes after I left, which was difficult. And I think this just exemplifies the impossible decisions that we always have to make as caregivers. There's just especially like in the sandwich generation, there's just no right way. There's no answer. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. And that was an experience that was really painful and difficult for me in this situation. So after my dad died, my mom got really sick. Even though my dad was not really well while he was alive, he was watching out for my mom. So he, when she would fall, he would call 911, things like that. She declined further, and we moved her into an assisted living place for very complex reasons that I won't get into in the interest of time. We can't move her into a local nursing home. So even though she was living in assisted living, it became very clear very quickly that it wasn't enough care for her. And I had to just essentially fill in the blanks. And again, I'm a new parent, and I'm just trying to do everything. My parents, when the last year of my dad's life, he wasn't really taking care of their bills. They had financial problems. Like, I had to figure out who to call when all their stuff was in collections, which I had no idea was even going on. And I also had to figure out how to get my mom the care she needed while, being extremely sleep deprived from being a new parent. So what my days looked like at this point is probably like the darkest period for me was, fielding things for my mom, doing all of this, and then coming home, being with my baby, going back, coming home. And I struggle with anxiety generally, but this period of my life was very intense. My mental health was in a bit of a decline at that point. And, I'd go to the hospital. My mom was in the hospital constantly for emergencies, come back home, go to the hospital, come back home to be with my kid. And I literally didn't have time for self-care. I tried to find a therapist, but I didn't have the time to field phone calls about, who has openings and who doesn't. I just didn't have time. And I think sometimes a misunderstanding for people in this like really intense crisis situations is like, well, you could always do yoga for 20 minutes or something, but like, I literally didn't have 20 minutes. If I had any time, I fell asleep because I was so tired. My mom did get a new diagnosis in this time period, which actually helped because we got some treatment for her. Things were looking a little better. I thought maybe I can get my feet under me. My kid was almost a year old at this point, and then the pandemic hit. So we lost childcare. Our child was in daycare. We lost childcare for 15 months, and my mom's assisted living place went into lockdown. So I wasn't able to go and care for her every day like I had been. It was extremely intense as well. We don't have any family in town, like I said, so we didn't have like a day off. My partner works full time and is in grad school, and so I'm just trying to fill in the blanks. And it was difficult, but we survived. And now our child is in daycare again. Although, of course, as anyone with kids in school or daycare knows, it's like constantly closing. And my mom's assisted living place is usually open unless they're having a COVID outbreak. So I'm able to get in there. So my days now I'm spending with my mom. caring for her, and then, spending the weekends and evenings and mornings with my kid. I came into the pandemic super depleted, so it's hard for me to even know how the pandemic affected me as a person in the sandwich generation, because I came in a really depleted experience. But it is, there have been some positive changes since we've had a little more access to care. So I am now able to do a little more self-care. Sometimes I even go on walks by myself, which is a revelation. It's amazing to have the opportunity to just walk alone. And, I'm trying to take good care of myself with the limited, I'm still very in it. So there's still a limited time. There's something about like changing my child's diaper and then, helping my mom with hers in the bathroom. There's just something that does to my psyche, like, cause it's all day long. And there's something like, I just feel like a vehicle for need, and not really my own person. Like I haven't really been able to establish an identity as a parent or as a caregiver because I'm just so busy doing the things that need to be done. And my mom is not in crisis today, is what I always like to say. Like when someone asks me, how is your mom doing? Well, today is okay. She's not in the hospital today, which is always a positive. And really all I'm able to say is I never really know, well, will childcare close today? Will my mom be in the hospital? I just have no idea what each day is really going to bring. So some things that haven't worked that I've found really challenging through this journey. A lot of times, like my friends or family with all good intentions would tell me to make sure that I was taking care of myself. And like I said, there was often times when I actually did not have literally any time. And I think people don't understand that self-care is a privilege in that way, that it does assume that you have spaciousness to some level. I definitely take deep breaths, and that is a form of self-care. But I think there's a lot of pressure on people in situations like mine to like really take care of myself. And I really couldn't. And now that I'm in a slightly different situation where things are a little more stable, I am able to do a little more. And it just happened naturally. Like I just started taking these long walks. I just started going to bed earlier because I think that my system was just ready and able to do that at that point. All I really needed was permission to collapse from myself, from others, knowing that that was really the only thing I could do at the end of each day. I think self-care needs to be self-directed and varied and contextual based on the person's situation, which Christina, I really appreciate you're sort of saying some of that stuff as well. And I think what's really people don't always know is that the most stress I feel is not actually at the situation itself. So yes, being a parent now of my now 3-year-old is exhausting. Obviously, anyone who has a toddler understands that. Caregiving is really tiring and also beautiful. But the hardest part is that the systems at large are really, they're really not designed for people who are dealing with the situations like elder care or disability justice. Like there's so many systems that work against us as a unit, like all day. And that's the thing I find the most stressful. For instance, I'll just tell a little story about what happened a couple weeks ago. And the story is so average. It's just like our average day. But my mom needed to go to a very important doctor's appointment. So I scheduled her a wheelchair van. She has a really hard time getting in and out of my car. And I told the assisted living place staff to help get her ready that morning, which is what they do. And I dropped my kid off at daycare. I drove to the doctor and waited for my mom. And my mom called me and said that somehow there had been a miscommunication and the assisted living staff did not know that there was an appointment for my mom. So without any access to care, my mom uses a wheelchair full time, is in bed most of the day, can't lift her arms past horizontal, somehow got herself dressed with excruciating pain and got herself down, had someone push her to the lobby. And by that point, she missed the wheelchair van by like a couple of minutes. And it turns out that the wheelchair van will come and wait 5 minutes, and they won't ring a doorbell or anything. They'll just come and wait 5 minutes. And if someone's not there, they leave. So obviously this is really difficult. I had to go tell the doctor, we have to cancel. And then my mom calls back and said, oh, there's someone here who's willing to use the assisted living place wheelchair van. It's usually broken down, but it's not today, because they, I think, felt bad about the situation. So got her in the van, and then the fire alarm went off in the building and all the staff were scrambling to figure out what it was. in this time period, I'm at the doctor, they're seeing me on the phone, hearing the fire alarm in the background, watching us try to navigate something that should be easy. So they finally got her on, they finally got her going. I said, okay, she'll be here in 10 minutes. And they said, well, that's 2 minutes after her doctor's appointment. And I was like, yeah, of course. Is it okay to be 2 minutes late? And they said, no, we won't accept anyone 2 minutes late. And this wasn't the part where they like take the information about your med list and everything. We'd already done that over the phone because of COVID protocols. This was the actual appointment. She would be missing by two minutes. So I, like with tears in my eyes, had to call my mom and say, I'm so sorry, you can't see the specialist today. And of course, the specialist is now moving to a different clinic, one that she's not an established patient at. So it'll take her 4 to 6 months to get in, and no one can expedite this. So I tell this story as a way to say, like, that morning was so chaotic and so stressful for really almost no reason. Like, it didn't need to be that way. Like, yeah, like I'm really worried and I'm stressed about my mom's condition, but like, I just want to get her care. I just want to be able to get her to the doctor effectively, things like that. So I think that's something people don't understand about my experience a lot of the time. Another thing is this experience is extremely isolating. I have a lot of friends who are parents of young children, and I really relate to them about being a parent, but there's this whole other part of my life that they don't understand. And then there's, my friends who have done caregiving before, but not with babies or young children, and have no idea what that's really like. And it's really like a wildly different experience. And so it's very isolating because I don't, I have a wonderful support system and wonderful friends, but it's, hard for people to relate to me because they're not doing the things at the same time, which is really the part of it that makes it feel almost impossible. And I also want to mention that it feels to me like grief is a privilege. There are so many times when I really, really want to be able to feel my grief about the situation, about my dad's death, about my mom's illnesses, about the situation that I'm in. But I'm so busy doing that I can't feel much of that at all. And that is what I wish for caregivers, that we had more ability to feel what we want to feel and almost process what we want to process and develop identities around this, because I don't even feel like I can have the time and space to do that. So what can be done, what has helped me is, I think the most important thing is, if you haven't been in this specific situation where you're sandwiched between these generations, to not assume that you know what the person's going through. I think assumptions can be really painful and difficult, and unsolicited advice from that state can be really further isolating to me and to others. So I think asking questions and witnessing the person going through it without trying to fix is really healing. I mean, that's some of the most healing things. I'm an external processor, so I talk to my friends a lot. I talk to my therapist. Like, I really get a lot from that communication. And when people haven't made assumptions, it's been the most helpful. And then again, Christina mentioned this, instead of making suggestions, offering concrete help, offering to drop off a meal, do a diaper run, babysit, or, actually sit with the person who's sick, pay for a massage, pay for a house cleaner. Any of these things make such a wild difference, because I'm just running around all the time trying to like just accomplish. And if someone just showed up at my house with diapers, I can't even tell you, it's just, obviously that's one less thing on my list, but there's the care that I would feel from someone just thinking of me, that I might need diapers for my kid, like, would be so beautiful to me. And then if you're in a position to do this, advocating for doctors to allow disabled patients more time. If they're in a wheelchair, they're not able to move very quickly, or using a walker, maybe build in 10 extra minutes at the beginning or at the end of an appointment, or if the person misses an appointment, not to make them pay for it, and just have empathy for the reason, like, if someone needs to use the bathroom in the middle of an appointment, like, don't feel frustrated when it's like 20 minutes later or 30 minutes later, and really building in understanding of what it's like to serve this population. Advocating for more buildings to be more ADA accessible. Like, just the other day, I was taking my mom to the dentist for an emergency dental procedure, and the ramp that we were going up was, icy. We live in Vermont. It was like a really icy morning, and it hadn't been salted or shoveled or scraped or anything. So I'm trying to push my mom in a wheelchair up this very steep, icy ramp. And also there was a giant potted plant in the front of it. So I couldn't even get her on without like lifting this huge, heavy potted plant away from it. So I think when people say, is your building accessible? And you say, well, we have a wheelchair ramp. That doesn't necessarily mean it's accessible, the ramp itself. And then like, the exam rooms, they can be really, really small. Like, it's almost impossible sometimes, often because I live in the Northeast with old buildings, for there to be room for me and an exam table, my mom, her wheelchair, and the doctor. So really thinking about what that means. Sometimes people will say, oh, there's just one step, but that's not accessible. My mom can't take a step, so thinking about things like that, I think can be really helpful. And then I think the thing that I really have noticed about my child and my mom's relationship, which has really touched me, is, I think a lot of people, when they hear about or see pretty intense illness, disability, or death, have a really hard time staying present, especially I think people in my generation when they haven't necessarily experienced a ton of that yet. And like I said, not turning away from it, but I recently shared this video of my daughter dancing with my mom, from her seat. And it just got me thinking about how, like, my daughter sees my mom not as disposable, like society sees her not as something to fix. She sees her as her like wonderful grandma who she loves, and she even helps her get into bed and she puts a little blanket over my mom's feet in bed. And she's seeing her through such a vision of joy. And I only wish that we all could see disabled people and elderly people through the same lens that my daughter sees them, and that all children really see them. And that I see them as well. Like, I hope to see them that way as well. And lastly, I'll just say, like, in terms of caring for myself, I think the most important thing that I've realized, just sort of through all of this, and I'm still in it, so I'm sure I'll have lots of realizations 5 years down the line. But right now, what I need to do for myself is mostly just be gentle with myself and know that there's not actually that much more I could be doing, because I'm just doing so much. And the pressure to do self-care, is just pressure to do like one more thing. And then I feel guilty for not like taking better care of myself, or, and I want to keep in mind that this won't last forever, and trust that I'm doing the most that I can. And when I go to bed at night, sometimes I just say to myself, like, hey, good job, you kept them both alive today. And sometimes that's the best I can do. Sometimes I'm not very present with either of them, but they're both still here, and has to be a win for me, because it can be really difficult. So I think trusting and knowing that I'm doing the best I can has been one of the most healing things for me along this journey. And thank you for allowing me to share this story. It's because it's so isolating. This is a very this feels really healing to just share. So thank you, and I'll pass it back to Emily.
Great. Cathy, thank you so much for your vulnerability. You have such a powerful story, and based on the chat, it seems like a lot of what you shared really resonated with people. So thank you for that. And Christina, such great information about the complex stressors that the sandwich generation caregivers are facing and ideas on how to get through those. And so, yes, we have a few minutes for Q&A. If you have questions, go ahead and submit them in the chat box, and we have a few to get started with. Cathy, you mentioned self-care needing to be self-directed, and I love that idea. So how do you go about figuring out what kind of self-care works for you?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think there's such, and maybe this is partially the subculture I'm in. I live in Burlington, Vermont, and there's like the wellness industry is like a thing. And I think it's really easy to get caught up in the ways that people around me are taking care of themselves and not listen into what I need. And I think the more that I'm able to say, like, you know what, I just don't have the energy to do yoga or to go to the gym or just even like sit there and connect with myself, because sometimes, the more I connect in, the more panic I feel. And right now I'm just going to binge watch Netflix. And that is a form of, because at some level, I just have to get ready for the next day. And I just have to like somehow get my mind to another place. And I think, I do have like the luck of having learned a lot of these skills before I was in this role. So I sort of know what works for me and what doesn't in general. And then just trusting myself in the moment that, like, if I need to watch like some really ridiculous TV show, that is self-care. Or if I need to go to sleep, that's self-care. If I need to cry or whatever it is, it doesn't have to be like the traditional forms that are sort of surrounding me by people who are not in my position.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's just about getting through the moment. What role does your partner play in helping to support you? And then Christina, if you want to chime in as well on how being a caregiver can impact other relationships outside of the caregiving dynamic.
Yeah, my partner is amazing. She does a ton, but she's like, I think I mentioned this, she's working full-time and in grad school from our tiny 2-bedroom apartment. And so she does as much as she can, but she is our source of income right now. Because of all of this, I've been unable to work. So I have to kind of pick up the rest. And I'm sorry, what was the other part of the question? Was that?
Yeah, how your partner supports you and how you can navigate that, how being a caregiver impacts other relationships.
Oh, yeah. I'll just say that like our relationship has definitely suffered from this experience because we just don't have time for each other, especially since COVID started, and that's really painful.
Yeah, also, I mean, I think that's very true. You know, caregiving takes so much of your life, and so it impacts all relationships, with partners, with friends, with siblings. I mean, everybody. And I think the more people understand kind of those relationships, the more it helps. But it's how do you figure out how are we going to support each other moving through this, and what support do we need from other people coming in to give us those breaks in that time, so that maybe we can spend time together. But I think that's such a unique experience depending on the families. And sometimes it's hard, but everyone is supportive and they're together and trying to do the best that they can. And then in some families it highlights conflicts that were already there, and it's how are we going to work through those now. So I think it just adds that whole other layer of challenges within our relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And then beyond the family unit, thinking about friends and a support system that was there before someone stepped into a caregiving role, how can caregivers manage feeling like that whole support system no longer understands what they're dealing with and the loneliness and tension that can create in those relationships?
Yeah, that's been particularly devastating for me, I think. I do have like one friend that is like, the most amazing human on the planet, in my opinion. And she is like very, very empathetic, and I don't know what I would do without her. All my other friends, like really, I think genuinely try their best, but to not, they just don't, it's too difficult, I think. And it's been very hard I think that's the reason I feel so isolated, is just because no one, people can say, oh, I'm so sorry you're going through that, but it's a different thing to meet with, or to be with someone who is literally going through it. It's just a wildly different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're about 1 minute out from 3 o'clock. Any last words from either of you?
Go ahead.
I again just want to say thank you. Like I said before, just because this is so extremely isolating, being able to actually just share it, even though you're all sort of faceless on Zoom, is a really beautiful feeling. And I really appreciate that people even care. It's hard to know sometimes that anyone is out there even thinking about people in my position. And it is actually like a healing thing to even be doing this. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you, Cathy, for sharing your story, and thank you everyone for being here today. And it was so wonderful to see all the comments and support in the chat for each other and for you, Cathy. And so I think that recognition that you're not in this alone, as much as it may feel alone so much of the time, to know that there's people who do care about you. And I hope you all leave with a feeling of support, and the people who are wishing you well and recognizing how hard this role is, and also just the value in it. And even when it's hard, that I hope there's some kind of value that you get out of it for yourself, or can at least acknowledge how well you do, even when you may not see it yourself, but to know kind of the amazing work and role that you have as a caregiver.
Great. Yeah, there's a lot of power in lived experience and storytelling and connecting with others going through what you're going through. So thank you both. We'll wrap there. Thank you guys for everything you shared today. So much value came out of the last hour. And thank you to everyone who joined us. I will be in touch with everyone in the next few days with the follow-up materials and that link to request your certificate of attendance. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.